I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Virtualization and Consolidation, Key Steps on the Road to Effective IT Outsourcing. My name is Arlene Itori, and I'm a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute, and it is our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with Atos Origin. I'll be working in the background to help answer any technical or general questions that you may have. We encourage you at any time during the presentation to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do this, click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click on the Submit button. Today's webinar is being recorded. You will be receiving a follow-up email in approximately 2 days, which will include a link with today's recorded webinar, as well as a link to a white paper pertaining to today's webinar topic, Complements of Atos Origin. The webinar recording and white paper will also be available at outsourcing.com. So without further ado, I will now turn it over to our moderator, Frank Casal, founder and CEO of the Outsourcing Institute, for the formal introduction of today's speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlene, and good morning, good day, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. This is apparently a hot topic. We've received a good amount of buzz in recent weeks, and there's a great turnout today, so I'll be brief and make sure I can get things teed up here. A few things I wanted to mention. If you haven't attended an OI webinar before, it's important to us that this be as valuable and interactive as possible. If you do have a question, don't be shy. Send it on in, and we'll do our best. I will certainly do my best as moderator here to get as many of the questions answered as possible. If we have any questions that we did not get to, then we'll be able to address them after the webinar. We'll follow up with you individually if we need to. A couple additional things. I want to thank Sergio and the Atos team for sponsoring today's webinar. Without sponsors, these things would not be possible. So thank you, Sergio, to you and your team. I'll be showing up on the back end of the webinar again to make sure we get into the Q&A segment. But again, throughout today's discussion, feel free to send us your questions. Last but not least, I'd like to say that we have an advisor, a leading advisor, a leading provider, and an actual practitioner to address this topic. So should be a great, lively, and interactive discussion, if not occasional debate. With that, Ahmed, let me pass the baton to you. Please feel free to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Frank. My name is Ahmed Singh. I'm the partner and global ICT lead for Avasant LLC. We are a Manhattan Beach-based sourcing advisor as well as a globalization and process optimization firm. In fact, Arlene, if you would please go to the next slide, it really talks a little bit more detail about what we do. So Avasant, we've done more than, I would say, 1,000 engagements. Have been consistently ranked in the top 5, top 10 outsourcing advisory as well as enterprise optimization firms globally. Really, the kind of work entails advising on optimizing enterprise IT and shared services initiatives, such as ICT strategy, implementing it, working with various providers, negotiating deals, helping through transitions, and such. We are also a leading globalization advisory firm and actually work with countries, states, and local governments all over the world. In fact, we are present in 4 continents as we speak, and working with the governments as well as the provider ecosystems for targeted economic development, for solutions that are designed really to make this a much better world, so to say. So with that, I would again welcome you to this webinar. I would be speaking primarily on the trends that we witness as sourcing advisors and the deals that we see on this very, very timely topic of consolidation and virtualization, and how it really leads to effective outsourcing. So we'll really jump into that topic. This slide here gives you a bird's eye view of the history. It's as with all things enabled by technology, the pace of change has accelerated a lot in the last few years. And virtualization is no different. 5 years back, when I was negotiating data center deals, all that you would be talking about was three-tier architecture and how many physical servers, and we haul iron, and we can move your data, and that kind of approach. Last 3-4 years, as you would see on the slide, I've seen a sea change in this. I would say going back to about 2009, a time frame, 2008, 2009 time frame, virtualization was something that some people were doing, and a lot others were starting to think of. Today, in the beginning of 2011, I just came back from one of our large clients, and I expected to hear the usual discussion around issues related to data center outsourcing. But guess what I found is that we are about 83% virtualized already, and are looking to now take the next step, and are wondering about private clouds versus semi-private public clouds, as well as seeing how do we really move further from cost reduction into cost avoidance mode. So in 2.5 years, we have seen virtualization, especially I would say in the large companies, take a strong hold, and in the mid-market, becoming more and more key interest topic. We are writing about it and speaking about it at almost, I would say, key seminars around the globe today. We rarely see for mid-markets this as something that will drive cost reductions and cost avoidance, as well as more efficient delivery of services in the next 3 to 5 years. That is on the right-hand side of the slide. If you would see the perceived benefits that we have really talked to our clients about, the core one really is consolidation. It really allows you to consolidate your IT assets, get more availability, get more efficiency out of them. It also obviously helps you lower your cost of operations and management, simply because there are fewer physical assets to manage. And on top of that, what is very interesting is that it allows for rapid service delivery. Now, that's a key issue with most IT infrastructure organizations today. They have to support a business which is really changing very rapidly in these economic times, and the business needs come down to applications, and application needs come down to servers effectively to run them. And very often, the IT infrastructure teams are notified at the last minute about, hey, we need so-and-so infrastructure to run our new applications or the change in applications. And virtualization is actually helping a lot in the infrastructure teams meet those rapid initiatives. It is also leading to a lot of higher utilization. In fact, a lot of my clients that I talk to, the old complaint of we only have 15% utilization seems to be going away quite a bit with virtualization and consolidation. And really, it's one of the key benefits that people are seeing there, driving more benefits, more efficiencies out of the already invested dollars in the hardware. The final one, last but not the least one, is really it leads you to dynamic resource balancing and non-interruptive maintenance, which is very essential for platforms such as trading, platforms which run enterprise systems, and downtimes, non-scheduled or even scheduled downtimes are a luxury that organizations can ill afford. So virtualization, we have seen if done properly as a tool to address that perennial IT requirement of scheduled or at times unscheduled downtime. So that's really where we are seeing the market today and some of the benefits of virtualization. If we could move on to the next one, Arlene. Would love to talk about, from a provider perspective as well as from the data centers, what are we seeing in the new data centers of the day, what we call the virtualized data centers. And what is interesting is that along with obviously allowing for high availability for virtual clustering, if you will, and really giving the providers an ability to meet customer needs for speedier changes in infrastructure delivery, these data centers are also leading the way, I would say in reduced carbon footprint and bringing in efficiency in power utilization, which, as most of you know, is one of the large cost components of IT infrastructure, especially data centers. And the power needed to run them as well as to cool them is a very big cost component, and is often seen as one of the driving moves along with the cost of real estate and the cost of manpower in where the data centers are located today. So virtualized data centers are really helping with that. As the slide says, better cooling, recycle heat, and multi-tier designs. To really provide a lot of high efficiency applications in a much less physical footprint. It also allows you flexibility in growth, and server sprawl is something that I think most of us have seen or heard about, I would say especially a phenomenon for mid-market companies. Server rooms, own data centers, as well as provider data centers all suffered from that. And I think virtualization and consolidation really gives you a way to address that. It also allows both in-source data centers as well as outsourced ones a closer alignment with the enterprise service architecture. And that is something that we find a topic very close to most CIOs' heart in terms of, hey, how do I align my service delivery with business needs? A CIO today is really not just the overall head of IT services, but really what I would call an ambassador of business in IT, along with obviously being the head of everything technical and technology driven. And I think a closer alignment is something that really helps this goal of running IT as a very key part of business. We talked about efficiency and space utilization, obviously reduce expenditure. And the key theme really that we are seeing, and I've talked to people providing data centers for cloud services, large providers that you've all heard of, as well as with organizations that are looking to either redesign, retool their own data centers or move them to other parts of the country, is that really the principle, the underlying principle is to go with a unified management for the entire IT infrastructure and really get away from bits and pieces and issues of, hey, we got virtual servers, but we really don't have sophisticated tools to manage them and so on. I think we are seeing a lot of growth in those tools that lead to not only virtualizing something, but also being able to monitor and manage it at that level. So that's what really gives you true flexibility. Next slide, Arlene, please. Moving on to another key area in the journey to virtualization, we talked about the perceived benefits. We talked about how organizations are adopting it and what kind of data centers are needed to really go do that. The next question that often gets asked to us is, how do we go about this journey? How do we virtualize? We understand the benefits. How do we really benefit from it? And really, there is no single answer here. The starting point does differ from organization to organization. We think it is very, very important to take the time to analyze your current state and then build a well-defined strategy and a total cost-based financial business case. Virtualization, consolidation, just like every other IT initiative, initially involves investment. And that is why, and obviously a 3 to 5 year payoff period, and sometimes it could even be as less as 1 year. But the CIO and the infrastructure manager obviously have to build a total cost-based business case and really get that money. But I can assure you, in most cases that we've talked to, that is investment worth made. So I think that is essential to have a very well-defined strategy and financial business case. You also have to analyze the true support requirements of your applications. What we've seen is we've seen the pendulum swing both ways here. We've seen where all applications, the critical ones, the enterprise ones, as well as the tier 2, tier 3 apps, everything really being pegged at support level 1. Everything is priority 1. Every break is SEV 1 or SEV 2. Or even if it's SEV 3 and SEV 4, everything requires root cause analysis and so on. And most of my provider friends do talk about that very animatedly. We've also seen the pendulum swing the opposite way, where cost is a huge issue, and we have seen organizations not even having effective DR or backup strategies. Now those things, all of those become even more essential to consider when you're looking at virtualization. So a recommendation we make very strongly is really to make sure that you have a very well-defined service level set, whether with your outsourced service provider or with your internal IT infrastructure management, and vice versa. If I'm an infrastructure manager, I would want to have that well-defined multi-tiered service level structure for my clients. So I know what is it that I'm getting into, and then I can really back it up with numbers, and if something else is needed, can really make everybody in the organization look at, hey, if you want a higher service level, this is what's going to cost you, and so on. The next point, very, very important point, is virtualization, just like a lot of other IT initiatives, can be done in multiple ways. And, much like the software development life cycle, you want to do it iterative, you want to do it waterfall, much like the transitions, you want to procure new assets and do a data transfer versus haul iron. One has to do a comprehensive needs assessment. This is a major multi-year initiative, and would strongly recommend that you work with experts within your organization as well as without to identify what are the true needs, where is it that we want to go, lay out that path clearly. Another important thing that we have seen, and we've seen issues rise because organizations do not focus on this, is there's always the culture about let's resolve our problems that are right now. But unless you design your strategy and design your architecture for close alignment with true business needs, I think you're basically pushing the problem to tomorrow. That's all that you're managing to do here. And last thing on the slide, but not the least, virtualization in managing a virtualized infrastructure does require a little different set of skills. And I would really recommend taking a look at your existing governance structure as well as your skill sets to make sure you're well suited and prepared for managing this new infrastructure that you probably will find yourself in a few months' time frame. Next, Arlene. Continuing on the theme of key steps, one more point I would like to make here is that all the customers of virtualization, all the organizations that really want to get into it, I would really recommend two things. One, focus on the key themes of virtualization. Anytime there's a change in the organization, there are multiple stakeholders wanting different things from that initiative. Will this support my BlackBerry in multiple ways? Will it let me download 100 more applications on my iPhone? Will it give my own team its own private space on the servers for testing these new trading applications we are building, and so on? And I think the virtualization managers need to be very aware of the core goals of the organization, as well as the key things that you're really looking to unify, streamline, consolidate, and rationalize. You are really looking to gain from standardization here, and would advise to really create a waiting list or waiting bucket, if you will, for initiatives that do not fall squarely into that bucket. And in the same breath, I would also say that your strategy for virtualization should really not lead you too differently from your existing IT service delivery models. With the business needs changing and some critical applications, almost always in the need of change for infrastructure, anytime you want to change, we recommend it be well thought out. And if needed, be gradual. The final few points I would make from our side, really as an advisor, is that ensure that you have really looked internally, as well as when you look externally at vendors, you look at offerings, you look at what suits your environment. You need to be really prepared with a knowledge of your environment and involving stakeholders, outside the infrastructure group itself, to ensure that you really know where you want to go here before you engage with somebody else. And finally, I would also talk about the fact that Virtualization, consolidation, again, like many things in IT, is to some extent an end in itself because it gives you benefits. But to some other extent, it is also just the next step on this journey of ongoing cost reduction, avoidance, and better service delivery. And there are already other steps on the horizon, as I talked about earlier, cloud computing, mobility management, and so on. And I think you really want to make sure that you're well aligned and understand how your virtualization strategy from today will lead to and what steps will you have to take for those next areas of innovation. So that's really all I had in terms of where we are, where we see the market, the trends, as well as some of our recommended key steps for all those that are looking to either increase their virtualization levels or working with their partners, advisors, and service providers for taking the next steps. I'll hand it back to you, Frank.
No, thank you, Ahmed. I have a question for you, if I may sneak one in now. You mentioned that you really started to see the activity heating up a couple of years back. Any sense as to what some of the key drivers were? The difference of kind of where people are just maybe passively thinking about this as opposed to actively making decisions to move forward?
Yeah, I think it's really a push and a pull thing here. The push obviously is the ongoing desire for reducing costs for better service delivery. And anytime you can leverage your existing physical hardware more, you can reduce your your heating costs, you can reduce your management costs, and so on. It helps you get there. From the pull factor, what I've seen is just the growth in the technological solutions to implement rationalization and virtualization. And I know Sergio will talk about that from Ato's perspective. I've seen this across the provider spectrum. A lot of very good tools have become available in the last 3 to 4 years, which allow you to monitor and manage the virtualized instances. I mean, the first virtualized deal I saw was about 7 years back, wherein a provider did create virtual instances but had issues monitoring and managing them. And so if you really want to pay per drink, you should be able to know the size of the drink. And I think that is something we are seeing really becoming mainstream now. And I think that's where the combination of these two results in rapid adoption.
Great, thank you. Sergio, you want to take it from here?
Yes, thank you, Frank. Good morning. My name is Sergio Banuet. I am Vice President of Business Development for Atos Origin, North America. So if you look at the introductory slide about Atos Origin, you will see that Atos Origin is a leading IT services company. It's a leader in Europe, and it's growing its presence in the U.S. and in all the emerging markets. It will enhance its footprint by the acquisition of Siemens Information Systems, which will become effective in July of this year. That will grow the size of the company by 60%. So from 7 billion, we expect to be a company of roughly 11 to 12 billion, with growing from 49,000 to 78,000 employees worldwide. In addition to this, we provide consulting, systems integration, and outsourcing solutions as any other large IT services organization. In addition to this, what high-tech transactional services mean, basically we are the leading payments processor in Europe, sort of like your first data company here in the U.S. And this engine has been used now for practically every high-volume transaction processing that you can think of in Europe. So we're importing this high-volume process transaction engine into the U.S. as we speak. So this is a very interesting offering that we have and unique in Europe. So in addition to this, what I would like to add is we are the IT partner for the Olympic Games. We've been doing this for several years now, since 2002, and we have a contract signed with the International Olympic Committee for 2016 for the Rio de Janeiro Olympic Games. We do this for the winter as well as for the summer Olympic Games, and we're the leading systems integrator for everything that has to do with IT for the Olympic Games. So with that being said, we'd like to turn the speaker over to Tim Carr, who will explain how we about virtualization and consolidation in our company. Thank you.
Hi, folks. This is Tim. Glad you were able to join us today. So first thing I want to talk about is really the different consolidation concepts that when we step into an engagement, the kinds of things that we're looking at doing to be able to really drive not only virtualization, but what kind of transformation can we provide for your IT organization. So the first one that we take a look at is management consolidation. And that's really driving the same processes and tools and methodologies across your environment to make sure you're doing the same kinds of things the same ways throughout your IT organization. That gives you the kinds of efficiencies that you want that leads to a quicker service delivery and things along those lines. The next one, which is really the first stage of a physical consolidation, is getting into what's pretty evident here, data center consolidation. So over time, a lot of organizations have multiple data centers throughout the U.S. or throughout the world just because they needed to put computing closer to where their customer locations were, or where the demand was, or through mergers and acquisitions or things along those lines. So really trying to drive things down into fewer data center locations while still providing DR facilities. That really lets you get down to the efficiencies of, let's cut out all the power and cooling costs that we don't need, and needing to staff the same jobs in different locations, things along those lines. So the next one we get into around physical consolidation is server and storage consolidation. And that's a lot of what we've been talking about here so far. It's not just how can we drive virtualization so we can reduce our number of servers out there, but what can we do to use fewer networking resources and fewer storage resources to really provide not only the same or better service, but also to really move you down the what's a better way of doing IT? How can we serve our business community better? Now the next phase that we, or steps that we can look at, is really getting into what we call rationalization type approaches. And the first one is application consolidation. And it's when you look across your enterprise, where is it that you're doing business processes or running applications, maybe legacy system, things along those lines, that could be served by existing tool sets. So trying to reduce your overall footprint in terms of how many applications do we have to support, how many people do I need to support all those different applications. What can we do to try and drive more business value out of fewer applications? So not only does that increase your support efficiencies, but it also helps you on the negotiation standpoint when you're dealing with vendors, because you've got more focused purchasing power with fewer vendors. You get a better deal out of it. And then finally, business alignment. That's where we're really talking about the fun stuff, where we're getting into things a lot around cloud computing, where we're talking about capacity on demand. Where can we start being able to get the kind of IT infrastructure in place where if I need something for a little bit, I want to just pay for it for a little bit and let it go when I'm done. Things along those lines. So as you move through those 5 different phases, that's where you see both more business value as well as more cost savings over time as you're able to implement stages of each of those. So moving on to the next slide, here's kind of a different view of it. I talked about the different phases there. When we look at a transformation program, harmonization and standardization, that's again, that logical, how do we get the same processes and procedures throughout the organization. The next couple of ones, data center consolidation, storage, and server consolidation, virtualization, talked about those. A new one on here is the business process outsourcing. That's along the lines of where can I take strategic parts of my infrastructure that are kind of expensive for me to run, where can I go somewhere else with that but still tie that into my organization. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can look at transformation, but what we're going to be focusing on next really gets into the 3 different phases around server consolidation and virtualization. It's pretty self-evident here. Making a quick pass at it, what can we do to
try and create a business, does it make sense to move forward with this? Getting into the guts of it, what's the best approach to it, what are the details behind it, and actually doing it. So if we move on to that, this is the first phase here. And this is typically something that takes a week or two to do. But it's sitting down with organizations to come up with what is it you're trying to do? Where are you trying to go? What's your strategic directions? What are your short and long-term objectives? And getting feedback from you around, here's what your IT computing environment looks like today. Where are your pain points? What is your, at a high level, how many servers do you got? How much storage do you have? Where's your networking? Where's your computing center? Things along those lines. And putting together a business case that, what's, based on our services and methodologies and best practices, what's the best way to go about trying to drive that kind of virtualization and consolidation efficiency out there? And then we run that through you. And that's where we get into going on to the next slide of, okay, so we've made it past that first quick blush approach of, does this make sense? How do we go about doing it? Okay, well, let's get down to the details of it then. Let's really start talking about what are your key business drivers. What are your, some of your regulatory requirements that you might have to be looking at, like SOX or FDA or things along those lines, as well as getting into the actual details. What kinds of servers do you have out there? What kind of operating systems? What are your applications that are in place? And really coming up with what is the overall right approach to drive down your IT computing costs by reducing your IT footprint wherever it makes possible and applying the right technologies and processes to really streamline those things. So at the end of the day, what we're able to deliver to you and the kinds of methodologies you can be using yourself is what is that final business case, and here's the project and here's how we go about making it happen. So if we move on to the third phase, here's, this one's pretty evident. We've made it through the process of what's the right way to do it, what are the costs, what are the benefits, what are our paybacks, what's the ROI that we're looking at. Let's go make it happen. And being able to bring the right people and best practices and tool sets, as well as the experience to go through what's the right way to make all of this stuff happen, that's going to be a key part of trying to pull this off. Because as everybody knows, once, if you don't want to try and reinvent the wheel when you've got a wealth of information to be able to pull from as far as what's the right way to do it, who are the right people to do it, things along those lines. So moving on, so let's talk about what are the kinds of computing environments that you can end up with. And when we're looking at this, there's really four buckets that we're kind of talking about here today. The first one on the left is traditional infrastructure, and this is taking your existing environment, probably applying some virtualization to it, and being able to run that in a way that makes sense for you. But at the end of the day, it's really, these are the kinds of things that, for one reason or the other, you don't want to move. Maybe you just want to virtualize it, tune up the environment, things along those lines. But for the most part, let's try and keep that environment the same as it is. Moving into the other three phases there really gets into the fun stuff here, where we're talking about cloud computing. And when we're talking about cloud computing, there isn't really just a cloud that you start dumping stuff into. There's, over time, there's really been a development throughout the industry of the different kinds of clouds that you want to bring into play based on whatever your business or legal requirements are. So for example, a dedicated cloud is one that could reside both in your environment as well as could reside somewhere else. But at the end of the day, all of the equipment, the processing power, the storage, the networking, the tools and stuff like that are dedicated just to you. And that does start to give you the efficiencies that you're looking for in terms of quick provisioning and standardization of process and stuff like that. But you've got some overheads because you've got to basically have the equipment in place to be able to handle the peaks that you need out there. So the way you start getting around that is when you talk about private clouds. And here's where you're starting to leverage resources from other providers like ourselves or whatever company that you're looking for to be able to dedicate individual servers, so things like blades and servers, things along those lines, to your computing resources. But let's start to leverage other shared environments like storage and networking and monitoring tool sets and things like that, where those are some of the key cost drivers that come into play as you need to ramp up and down quickly in terms of capacity out there. And then the third environment is really the shared cloud. And here's, at the end of the day, where you're talking about, all I really care about is I need an OS someplace that is serving a function for me. I need a server out there that's doing this for me when I need it, and when I'm done with it, I want to be able to turn it off and throw it away, or spin it back up later whenever I need it. So all of those different environments, it's not that you would go and drop your entire infrastructure into any one of those. Most companies out there are looking to put different parts of their environment into these different buckets based on strategic need. So for example, as I talked about the dedicated cloud, you need to be able to, for some reason or another, this has got to stay on site. Maybe it's a political reason or whatever. Private cloud is along the lines of where I can put some computing resources that are important to me, but let's see if we can run it a little bit cheaper, because at the end of the day, I want to take advantage of some tools and processes and equipment that I don't have out there. And then the shared cloud is along the lines of things like seasonal capacity demands. I need to be able to throw some more web servers at it because it's close to Christmas, or here's a new development project, and I want to be able to ramp this up for a couple of months, and when we're done developing, turn it off. So each of those different environments, as I said, come into play. And one of the things that's near and dear to my heart is around green computing. One of the things Atos is putting into play is this zero carbon emissions, in terms of if you do any kind of cloud computing with us, we're going to offset that. And that could turn into, that's just, at the end of the day, that's a good feeling to be able to protect the environment out there where you can, but that can also be a marketing advantage. So moving on to my last slide. Arlene, there you go, thanks.
Yep.
One of the advantages of being able to move things into a cloud environment, and one of the things that we've been setting up here inside of Atos Origin, is let's take these same environments and replicate them around the world, so that wherever you need that computing power for whatever reason, let's be able to move that workload there when you need it. So, for example, if it's cheaper for some reason to run this environment out in Asia, let's go ahead and do that out there. Or if I've got a customer demand that's out in Europe, let's be able to put some processing power out there. But at the end of the day, still be able to utilize those same tools and processes and methodologies and really leverage that kind of environment that gives you the kind of IT efficiencies that at the end of the day everybody's trying to drive out of it, so that you can get a higher business value. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Ed Steenman, who's the Director of Information Technology out at Allen County, Indiana, and one of our customers.
Thank you, Tim. As Tim said, I am in Indiana. Allen County is the largest county geographically in Indiana, and by way of the latest 2010 census, we're about 355,000 people. The city of Fort Wayne is just under 255,000. We started outsourcing back in 1987, and the city and county each had outsourcing contracts with the same vendor. And then in 2009, we did become an Atos Origin customer, and we are somewhat unique in that we are two local government entities that share a single contract with Atos Origin. We were able to evaluate and come to agreement on contract terms that crossed both the city and county lines. So that's a little bit about where Allen County is. Arlene, if you could step forward, please. So about our environment, we have 205 servers that we currently support. 75% of those we have moved to a virtual environment. we've been doing that over the a period of the last 4 years or so. We started this out in 2006, and for the first couple years that was a very slow process. We were only able to move to about 40 virtual servers in the first couple of years, and we're now well over 150 virtual servers in our environment as of now. We're currently working on our disaster recovery plan, and that is, as we finish that plan, we're looking to be closer to 90% of our servers being virtualized to be able to adequately provide recovery services when in the event of a disaster. One of the key things that has been a side benefit and that we take advantage of a lot is the ability to put servers into service in a matter of hours. We keep templates for our most popular server needs. We're able to deploy those with really very little work, and converse to our old environment where new hardware had to be procured, you had setup, configuration time, and so we're able to provide service to our customers much more quickly. We're also, as I mentioned, disaster recovery. We do see this as a very big advantage for us should a disaster occur. We're not ready quite yet, but we are working toward a secondary backup site where we'll be able to stand up virtual servers in a very short period of time should something occur. The cost savings for virtualization were one of our key drivers when we started out the effort. We were looking to save on hardware capital costs. We were looking to save on power. We were looking to actually increase our server utilization because we had been monitoring some of our servers and they were sitting there idle much of the day. And so along with the power conservation also comes cooling conservation. We've dramatically reduced the sprawl in our data center. We've got a concise set of server racks that are running all of our operations with a minimal amount of cooling necessary. And one of the other advantages that we were able to attain is the ability to separate out applications that don't want to play well with other applications. We're able to, in many cases, separate those applications onto their own virtual server and eliminate some of the application incompatibility that we had experienced in the past. And looking forward a little bit, we have initiated a pilot program for virtual desktops. We don't have the conclusions on that yet, but we are investigating that to see what kind of advantages we can glean from that feasibility study. So that's a little look at our environment, and I will turn it back over to Frank for Q&A.
Great. Thank you for sharing your story. There's nothing more valuable than an actual case study. A few questions, if I may. First off is, what was the kind of the driver as to what prompted your team and your organization to move in this direction? Could you share that with us?
The virtualization really started out as we wanted to reduce our hardware expense. Back in the 2006 time frame, I think, is when server hardware may have been at its most expensive point. We have, technology has brought the price of servers down somewhat for a given performance level, but at that point in time, we were spending a lot on servers because we were in a growth period. We were having to buy multiple servers, and said, we got to figure out a way to reduce our costs here.
Okay, and I'm curious, was it more of a top-down type of a scenario, or was this something that you identified as a direction to go, and you brought it to management? And I guess related question is, was it that tough of a sell, or did they get it?
Well, it was a collaborative effort. I mean, the server administrators were gaining knowledge about virtualization. The technology was at a point where it was becoming ready for prime time, and so we were able to kind of make it a group effort, and from a selling standpoint, it was an easy sell when we said we can put multiple applications in a supported, stable manner on one or a few pieces of hardware and grow from there. It wasn't any difficulty in selling that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Ed, for those practitioners that are listening in on today's webinar, or in the future will listen to it on demand, what is your advice to those that are maybe at the early stages of this and kind of wondering if they should move forward or not?
Well, one of the key things is, and it's becoming easier today than it really was in the past, is making sure that the applications that you are going to move to a virtual environment have been tested in a virtual environment. We did hit a couple of bumps in the road with some of that early on, but like I said, many of the applications today have been tested in a virtual environment. But there may still be some out there that you do have to have a little bit of sensitivity to.
Mm-hmm. Question with regard to vendor selection. I'm sure pricing was a critical part of that decision. Always tends to be, especially in these types of economies, and certainly with regard to this type of this type of environment, if you will. But could you share with us what other attributes it is that you found attractive in the vendor you ultimately selected, which is, and obviously in this case, Atos? I'm just looking to have you share that with others that are ideally thinking beyond price as a decision.
Well, one of the things that we required of our vendors as we were going through the evaluation was to show us what you can do for us and show us where you've done it before, because we didn't want to be necessarily on the bleeding edge, and we didn't want to be taking a chance on an unproven entity. We're Midwest, conservative. We want to make sure that what we're paying for we're going to receive, and so that was a big thing. And price was a very considerable point, being conservative again. And then one thing that may be unique to us is that we had an existing outsource vendor with a staff of about 50 people, and we wanted to protect the employment of those people. Although they weren't city or county employees, they were employees of the outsourced vendor. We really thought of them as city and county employees. I mean, they live here in Fort Wayne and Allen County, and Atos was very interested in keeping that staff for those that obviously met the skills requirements. They were very interested in keeping that staff on board and maintaining that institutional knowledge that they had gained over a period of years as they had been here. So that was another prime reason for selecting Atos.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I have another question, actually a couple here that were sent to me. I want to see if I could direct this next one to you, Ahmed. And the question is, under what circumstances is virtualization and consolidation, worth considering? Or maybe said another way, at one point, is it possibly not worth for an organization? Is there kind of a decision logic as to where you go left or where you go right on this thing?
I think the decision logic has more to do with investment capability than whether it is helpful or not. You may have, and I think it also depends on the underlying hardware. There may be few steps worth considering before you embark on virtualization consolidation. As I said earlier, you could look at your existing infrastructure and see, if you got everything, you got a lot of servers sprawl already. You probably want to fix some of that. If you got old servers, and if your applications in themselves are not able to run on a highly virtualized platform, I think you want to take a look at that as well. So it's really a combination of what is your applications and server portfolio look like today. Can they work with these new technologies? And two, whether it is a good time for you to be making those investments and really seeing if the return is 2 to 3 years. I think it's definitely worth considering. Apart from that, I guess everybody else, I would highly encourage taking a very strong look at this technology. I think most people I've heard or talked to have only talked about its helpfulness and its capability to slash costs, as Ed was talking about in a real-world scenario.
Okay, great. And I guess my final question I'll direct to you, Timothy. Ed, I guess somewhat addressed this, but maybe, Tim, you can expand upon it. The question is it possible to virtualize in the middle of an IT outsourcing contract?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, one of the key things that we usually bring to play is when we are in the middle of outsourcing is virtualizing your environment. So one of the things that we're able to do is not only use all the industry tools out there to come up with what's the right virtualization configurations and things like that, but just having the folks that have done this literally hundreds and thousands of times walking through the process of what are good candidates for virtualization right now. We're in the middle of outsourcing. When we're first doing the process to writing down the scale to what do we need to hold off on for right now. Let's just move over as is. Let's get the environment stabilized and stuff like that, and then look at virtualizing that down the road. So most engagements that we've got, we'll see a high amount of virtualization up front, and then we save the harder things for later when it makes more sense to do so.
Great. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time. Ahmed, Sergio, Timothy, and Ed, great discussion, and maybe we should consider part 2 at some point. And I think Arlene had just looked to our slide here. For most of you that are members, you have a good sense of what we do. If at any given point you need access to more information, insight, you want to register for future webinars or many of the local events we do, feel free to come and see us up at outsourcing.com. And if you're on the registration list for this webinar, we'll make sure we notify you for future happenings as well. Again, thank you all, and have a good day.